His hand came out of nowhere. The slap cracked across my cheek like a whip, and the sting spread through my face in a hot wave. Matthew Vale stood over me in the glass conference room, his jaw trembling with rage. "Hand over your key card and get out," he hissed through clenched teeth. The entire floor could see us through those transparent walls. I watched faces turn toward the commotion, then quickly look away like scared fish diving for cover. My cheek burned, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. The fluorescent lights above us hummed coldly, casting harsh shadows across his twisted features. Instead, I stared right back at him. I could see the tiny muscle jumping in his jaw, the sweat beading on his forehead. He was scared. Good. He should be scared. 3 years of working under this man had taught me to recognize his tells when cornered. I reached into my blazer pocket and felt the smooth plastic of my keycard. Matthew's eyes followed my movement, waiting for me to place it on the polished conference table like an obedient employee. Instead, I slid it deeper into my pocket. I said, "Give me the card, Bianca," he repeated, but his voice wavered this time. Security guards appeared at the door, unsure who was really in charge of this situation. I stood up slowly, my legs surprisingly steady. "Please note the time," I whispered to the receptionist as I walked past her desk. The elevator doors slid shut behind me, and I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My reflection stared back from the polished steel doors. My cheek was already turning red, a perfect handprint marking where Matthew had struck me. Above my head, a small camera blinked its cold recording light. The elevator descended in silence, carrying me away from 3 years of dedication and toward an uncertain future. Instead of going home to cry or call my sister, I drove straight to urgent care. The nurse who examined me had kind eyes and gentle hands as she photographed the bruise from 3 different angles. "Workplace assault," I said clearly when she asked how this happened. She wrote it down in my chart, her pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. Her expression remained professional, but I caught sympathy flickering in her gaze. From the clinic parking lot, I called the police. My voice stayed calm and steady as I reported what had happened, which seemed to surprise the officer taking my statement. He gave me an incident number, and I wrote it carefully in the small notebook my father had given me years ago. "You sound very composed for someone who just got hit," the officer said. "I believe in doing things the right way," I replied. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from HR, scheduling a mutual separation meeting for 9 o'clock the next morning. I smiled grimly and started my car. The HR conference room felt like a freezer the next morning. 2 representatives sat across from me with forced smiles, calling Matthew's assault a misunderstanding. They slid a severance package on the table with papers attached, including a non-disclosure agreement that would seal my mouth forever. The documents were thick, intimidating, designed to overwhelm rather than inform. I recognized the intimidation tactic immediately from my years watching corporate damage control. "We think this is very generous," the woman said, tapping the dollar amount with her manicured nail. "Much better than going through a messy process." I read every line carefully while they watched me. Then I looked up and made 2 simple requests. "I need you to preserve all security footage from yesterday, and I'd like to use the employee ethics hotline, as outlined in our company policy." Their smiles cracked like old paint. The man shifted in his chair and cleared his throat. "Well, that's not really necessary, Bianca. We can handle this internally." "The policy says any employee can use the hotline," I said. "Are you telling me I can't follow company policy?" They exchanged glances. The woman's pen clicked nervously against her clipboard. "Of course you can use it," she said finally, "but we hope you'll consider our offer first." I gathered up the papers without signing anything. "I'll be in touch," I said. In my car, I dialed the ethics hotline and read them a list of vendor invoice numbers I knew by heart. That night, I spread invoices across my kitchen table like a puzzle. For months, something had bothered me about certain vendor payments, but I hadn't had time to dig deeper. Now I had nothing but time. The stack of papers grew as I pulled file after file from my home office, documents I'd saved over years of meticulous record-keeping habits, inherited from my accountant father. The pattern jumped out immediately. Round numbers everywhere, $50,000 add-ons for expedited compliance. But our company didn't have expedited compliance. We had standard processing times, period. Yet here were dozens of invoices with these mysterious charges. I traced the payments back to a vendor called Streamline Solutions. The company had been recommended by Matthew just 6 months ago. I pulled up public business records on my laptop and started cross-referencing ownership information. My coffee grew cold as I clicked through pages of corporate filings. Then I found it. The smoking gun that made my heart race. Matthew Vail and the owner of Streamline Solutions were listed as co-owners of a Lake Cabin LLC. They weren't just business partners, they were friends splitting fake invoices. I printed everything and organized it in a neat folder. My father always said, "Keep your receipts, kid." I was keeping mine. My phone buzzed with a text from a blocked number. "Stop digging, Tess." I screenshot the message and added it to my folder. Then I kept digging. I returned to the office that evening to turn in my company laptop and phone. The building felt different after hours. Quieter, with long shadows stretching across the lobby. Mr. Alvarez, the night janitor, was mopping near the elevators when he saw me. His weathered face brightened with recognition, then immediately clouded with concern. I'd always made sure to greet him warmly during my years here, unlike many executives who treated him as invisible furniture. His worried eyes met mine, and he glanced around to make sure we were alone. "I saw what happened yesterday," he said quietly in accented English. "Through the glass. I saw him hit you." My throat tightened. "You saw it?" He nodded firmly. "I was cleaning the conference room next door. I saw him demand something from you, saw you put your hand in your pocket instead of giving it to him. I saw the whole thing. Would you tell the truth if someone asked you about it?" I asked. "See, of course, what he did was wrong." Mr. Alvarez leaned on his mop and looked thoughtful. "You know, the camera in that conference room, they say it's broken, under maintenance, but the elevator camera always works." A chill ran down my spine. "The elevator camera?" "Sigh. It sees everything. The company, they don't want employees to know, but I've seen them check it when there's trouble." I thanked him and headed for the loading bay exit. As I walked, I realized Matthew had made a crucial mistake. He'd hit me right in front of a camera he didn't know was recording. The next morning, I sent carefully worded emails to the IT department and the audit committee's general inbox. I cited specific company policies about evidence preservation and requested that all security footage from the day of the incident be saved. I used the exact language from our employee handbook, making it impossible for them to refuse. Each email was time-stamped and sent with read receipts, creating an unbreakable chain of documentation. My father's construction background had taught me that paper trails were more valuable than gold in any dispute. I copied the external auditing firm that handled our annual reviews. If the company tried to delete anything, multiple parties would know about it. My phone rang within an hour. It was someone from IT, sounding nervous. "Miss McHaleson, about your footage request. We'll need to verify this with management." "The policy doesn't require management approval." I said politely, "Please preserve the footage as requested." 2 hours later, the external auditor called me directly. "We've received a copy of your preservation request. We'll be following up to ensure compliance." That afternoon, Matthew emailed me personally for the first time since the slap. The subject line was urgent. "Return company property immediately." The message was short and threatening. "Return the key card or we will pursue theft charges against you." I stared at the email for a long moment. He was getting desperate, making threats he couldn't back up. I still had the key card, and now I had the whole chain of custody documented. Every move was falling into place. I arranged to return the key card the next day at noon, right at the front desk with witnesses. I wanted everything documented with timestamps and signatures. No room for Matthew to twist the story later. The marble lobby bustled with lunch hour foot traffic, providing perfect cover for what needed to appear as a routine transaction. I'd chosen the timing deliberately, ensuring maximum visibility and multiple potential witnesses to the professional handoff. The marble lobby felt like a courthouse as I approached the reception desk. I laid the plastic card down gently and asked the receptionist to sign a receipt confirming the time and date of return. She looked confused but complied. I photographed the handoff with my phone, making sure to capture the timestamp on the receipt. Then I walked out without saying a word to anyone. On the sidewalk, my phone pinged with a LinkedIn message. It was from a former client, someone I'd worked with on a major project last year. "Bianca, are you okay? I'm hearing strange rumors about some kind of scene at your office." I felt a surge of gratitude that someone cared enough to reach out. But I also knew I had to be careful about what I said. Everything could be used against me later. I typed back a simple response. "Thanks for checking in. I can't discuss specifics right now, but I really appreciate you asking." I logged the interaction in my notebook. I was building a trail, not of drama or complaints, but of restraint and professionalism. It would matter later. That evening, a courier knocked on my door with a certified letter. It was from the company's legal department. Termination for cause. The termination letter accused me of insubordination and misconduct, corporate speak that would make it impossible for me to get unemployment benefits or find another job easily. They wanted to destroy my reputation and my livelihood. The language was harsh and absolute, designed to paint me as a problem employee who'd finally crossed an unforgivable line. I read each accusation twice, noting how carefully they'd avoided mentioning the actual incident that triggered my termination. I called my attorney the next morning. She was a friend of a friend who specialized in employment law, and she smiled when she saw my organized folder of evidence. "If they want to make this legal, we'll play by legal rules," she said, flipping through my medical records, police report, and policy citations. "They're claiming cause, but they have no documentation of any performance issues or previous warnings," she continued. "And they're ignoring the fact that their manager committed battery against you. This letter actually helps our case." We spent the morning crafting a response that outlined Matthew's assault, my proper use of company procedures, and the evidence preservation requests. Every word was careful and factual. That afternoon, I got a call that made my heart race. The external auditor wanted to schedule a formal interview with me about my allegations against the vendor payment system. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning. And Miss Michelson, bring everything you have." I hung up and looked at my folder of invoices and corporate filings. Everything I had was about to become very important. Matthew was about to learn that hitting me was the biggest mistake of his career. The audit office was sterile and quiet, with fluorescent lights humming overhead. I sat across from a gray-haired man who introduced himself as the lead investigator. His pen was poised over a legal pad, and a recording device sat between us on the table. The setup felt formal and serious, like a courtroom without the judge. 2 additional investigators flanked him, their notepads ready to capture every detail of my testimony about the vendor fraud scheme. I didn't dramatize or embellish. I simply explained how round numbers and invoices often hide padding, how expedited compliance wasn't a real service our company offered. I handed over the public documents showing Matthew's connection to Streamline Solutions through their shared lake cabin. The investigator's pen stopped moving when I mentioned the cabin. He looked up at me with sharp eyes. "You're saying your supervisor had a financial relationship with this vendor?" "The public records show they co-own property," I said. "I'm not making assumptions about what that means." He made several notes, then asked the question that made my stomach drop. "Did you ever approve one of these questionable invoices under Mr. Vale's direction?" My mind raced back through months of late-night emails and rushed approvals. Then I remembered. 3 months ago, Matthew had sent me a Slack message at 11 p.m. asking me to greenlight an add-on charge. I'd refused and asked for justification. He'd approved it himself the next morning. I pulled out my phone and showed him the Slack thread. The investigator's eyebrows rose as he read Matthew's messages. "We're going to need to involve the board," he said quietly. HR called that afternoon with a new offer. "We'd like to revise our settlement," the woman said, her voice artificially sweet. "But we'd need you to retract your allegations about Mr. Vale." The desperation in her tone was barely concealed beneath the professional veneer. I could almost picture the emergency meetings happening behind closed doors as the company scrambled to contain the growing scandal before it reached the board level and attracted regulatory attention. I felt a trap closing around their words. You want me to retract a police report? I asked. Silence stretched across the phone line. Well, not exactly retract, but perhaps clarify that you may have misunderstood. Could you put that request in an email? I interrupted. I want to make sure I understand exactly what you're asking me to do. The line went quiet again. We'll get back to you, she said and hung up. 20 minutes later, a calendar invite appeared in my email. Special board session, vendor risk assessment. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday, just 5 days away. I called my attorney and read her the HR conversation notes I'd scribbled during the call. She laughed, actually laughed. They just put their witness tampering attempt in writing, she said. This keeps getting better. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly everything was moving. A week ago, I was a quiet operations analyst who liked neat spreadsheets. Now I was about to testify before a corporate board about fraud and assault. My cheek had healed, but the memory of that slap still burned. I spent the weekend at my sister's house, ice on my cheek and spreadsheets on her coffee table. She made tea and sat beside me, helping me organize my evidence into neat piles. Dad would be proud, she said, watching me label folders with precise handwriting. Remember how he always said to keep your receipts? I smiled, thinking of our father's weathered hands and his construction workers' wisdom about documentation. He taught me that the truth was only as good as your ability to prove it. At dawn on Sunday, my phone rang. It was Mr. Alvarez, the janitor, and he sounded agitated. Miss Bianca, they're doing something to the cameras. There's a man with a ladder in the hallway where the conference room is. My blood went cold. What kind of man? Contractor. He has a work order to replace the camera housing. But miss, that camera was working fine last week. I thanked him and immediately called the investigator's emergency line. Within an hour, a police detective was at the building, photographing the contractor's work order and securing the camera equipment for evidence. The work order was dated just 2 days ago, well after my evidence preservation request. Someone was trying to destroy the proof of Matthew's assault. But they were too late. The footage had already been copied and secured by multiple parties. Matthew's desperation was showing, and it was about to destroy him. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. I dressed carefully in my most professional suit and drove to the office building where I'd worked for 3 years. Now I was entering as an outsider, escorted by security to a boardroom I'd never seen before. 8 board members sat around a polished conference table, their faces serious and attentive. The lead investigator was there, along with a court reporter and someone introduced as the company's outside counsel. Miss Mikkelsen, the board chairwoman said, please raise your right hand. I was sworn in for a recorded statement. The first question was simple and devastating. Did Mr. Vale strike you on the afternoon of March 15th? My voice didn't waver. Yes. I heard someone breathe out sharply, like air escaping from a tire. Then they asked me to walk through the vendor invoices, slowly and methodically. For the next hour, I explained round number padding, shell companies, and the suspicious pattern of payments to Streamline Solutions. I showed them Matthew's Slack messages and the public records connecting him to the vendor's owner. Finally, a board member asked the question that changed everything. Ms. Mikkelsen, what exactly is expedited compliance? I looked directly at him and said clearly, it doesn't exist. Our company has never offered expedited compliance services. It's not a real charge. The room fell silent. Through the window, I could see Matthew's office on the floor below. His desk was empty. The board's outside counsel pulled up the lake cabin documents on his laptop and projected them onto the wall screen. Matthew's name sat there in black and white, co-owner of an LLC with the same person who owned Streamline Solutions. Matthew was called in to explain. I watched through the glass partition as he entered the boardroom, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. He tried to maintain his usual commanding presence, but it was cracking. It's a group investment, he said when confronted with the documents. Several of us went in together on a vacation property. The counsel checked his notes. According to the LLC filing, there are only 2 owners listed. You and Mr. Patterson from Streamline Solutions. That's a group of 2. Matthew's explanation fell apart in real time. He stammered about other investors who weren't on the paperwork, about informal arrangements that couldn't be documented. Each word dug his hole deeper. By the end of the session, the board voted unanimously to suspend him, pending a full investigation. I watched from the conference room window as Matthew cleared out his desk under security supervision, the same cold camera recording his exit. Justice felt strange, not triumphant but quietly satisfying, like solving a difficult puzzle. The truth had weight. It couldn't be slapped away or silenced with threats. 2 days later, an anonymous post appeared on a workplace gossip website. Disgruntled analyst fabricated assault claims after being denied promotion at logistics firm. Sources say she's bitter about her career stagnation. I screenshot the post and forwarded it to my attorney, who actually grinned when she read it. "Defamation discovery is one of my favorite games," she said. "Let's see who posted this." We requested the poster's IP address from the website. The response came back quickly. The post had originated from a corporate IP block registered to my former employer's building, specifically the 12th floor where the executive offices were located. Matthew, or one of his allies, had just handed us evidence of a smear campaign. Each desperate move they made only strengthened my case. Meanwhile, my former client reached out again, this time with screenshots of an email Matthew had sent them from his personal account. He'd blamed me for vendor delays and asked for their patience while the company handled personnel issues. The timestamp on Matthew's email was from the day before my termination letter, proof that he'd been planning to fire me before the assault even happened. The story he'd told the board about a regrettable incident was falling apart. I forwarded the screenshots to the investigator and the board. Matthew's credibility was evaporating like water on hot pavement. I returned to the office one last time to collect my personal items, a coffee mug, a small plant, and a framed photo of my family. Security escorted me to my old desk, watching as I packed a small cardboard box. My desk badge no longer worked, but the lobby security guard who'd witnessed the aftermath of Matthew's assault gave me a sympathetic look and manually logged me into the system. He remembered me as the quiet analyst who always said good morning. "Sorry about what happened," he said quietly. "That wasn't right." My small ficus plant was gone. When I asked about it, HR claimed that plants are discarded after employee separation. It was petty and cruel, and perfect for the record of their unprofessional conduct. But in my desk drawer, I found something I hadn't left there. A printout of one of the Streamline Solutions invoices with Matthew's initials clearly visible in blue ink. Someone had planted evidence of his approval process. I photographed the document carefully and added it to my growing file. Matthew's signature was, right there in his own handwriting, authorizing a fraudulent charge. He'd left a trail of his crimes in ink, and now that trail led straight back to him. The box felt light in my hands as I walked out, but the evidence felt heavy with possibility. The criminal investigation moved faster than I expected. A detective interviewed Mr. Alvarez and pulled the elevator security footage that showed Matthew's assault clearly. The video was short but devastating, my cheek turning red, his hand raised in anger, the moment when I stepped back with my dignity intact. The footage was ugly and undeniable. There was no way to explain it away or call it a misunderstanding. 2 weeks later, the district attorney's office sent me an email. Misdemeanor battery charges had been filed against Matthew Vail. The case would move forward, regardless of any civil settlement. I printed the email and added it to my folder. The legal system was taking Matthew's violence seriously, even if his company had tried to cover it up. That same day, the company issued a bland press release about leadership changes and their ongoing commitment to ethical business practices. But buried in the investor call transcript was a sentence that felt like fresh air. "We are cooperating fully with authorities regarding an incident involving a former employee." My attorney negotiated the final piece of justice, not just a settlement, but an official letter correcting my personnel file from terminated for cause to separation without fault. My record would be clean. Matthews would be permanently stained. With the settlement money and my newfound freedom, I registered Michelson Process Consulting, LLC. I didn't try to poach clients from my former employer or badmouth them publicly. Instead, I focused on what I did best, creating clean, transparent processes for vendor management. I posted white papers about identifying round number padding and hosted a free webinar called Red Flags in Vendor Billing. 312 people attended, and 5 companies asked for formal proposals afterward. My expertise was finally being recognized on my own terms, not filtered through Matthew's ego or corporate politics. I worked from a small office downtown with a view of the river and room for growth. The phone rang constantly with inquiries. Companies wanted to audit their vendor relationships, clean up their procurement processes, and protect themselves from the kind of fraud that had destroyed Matthew's career. One morning, I opened my email to find a surprise. The largest client I'd ever served at my old company had announced an open request for proposal for vendor risk assessment and cleanup services. They wanted someone to review their entire vendor database and identify potential problems. The contract would be worth 6 figures and could launch my consulting firm into a new tier of success. I smiled as I started drafting my proposal. I spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting my RFP response. Every price was transparent, every deliverable was itemized, and every methodology was explained in clear language. I didn't oversell or overpromise. I simply outlined exactly what I would do and how much it would cost. The presentation went smoothly. I felt confident but not cocky, knowledgeable but not arrogant. When they asked about my experience with vendor fraud detection, I spoke about patterns and red flags without mentioning my former employer by name. 2 weeks later, they called with news that made my hands shake. I'd won the contract. They chose my proposal because of its clarity, compliance focus, and what they called my boring love of process. Boring had never sounded like such a compliment. The project kickoff meeting included a surprise twist. The client's legal team mentioned they wanted me to review historical invoices from several vendors, including my former employer. They discovered discrepancies in payments and wanted an independent analysis. I accepted the assignment carefully, professionally, and with complete objectivity. I would analyze the data within the contract scope, deliver factual findings, and let the chips fall where they may. Matthew's past was about to catch up with him through legitimate business channels. I was going to beat him not with revenge, but with competence. The analysis took 6 weeks of careful work. I reviewed thousands of invoices, tracked payment patterns, and documented anomalies using the same methodical approach that had uncovered Matthew's fraud in the first place. The patterns sang clearly through the data. Round numbers, identical memo lines, suspicious timing across 8 consecutive quarters. The total overpayments exceeded 8 figures, enough money to fund entire departments for years. I delivered my report to the client and their counsel without fanfare or personal commentary, just facts, figures, and professional recommendations for recovering the fraudulent charges. The client's legal team reviewed my findings for 2 weeks before taking action. When they did, it was swift and decisive. They notified my former employer of their intent to recoup all overpayments with interest and copied the company's board of directors on the demand letter. Matthew had been stealing not just from his own company, but from their largest client. The ripple effects would destroy what was left of his reputation and potentially bankrupt the vendor fraud scheme. My phone buzzed with a text from the investigator. "Excellent work. This case is airtight now." I set the phone down and looked out my office window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Matthew was learning that his crimes had consequences that reached far beyond a single slap. 6 months later, Matthew pleaded guilty to misdemeanor battery and agreed to pay restitution for the vendor fraud scheme. The criminal case was closed with a conviction on his record, a fine that wiped out his savings, and permanent removal from any executive position at the company. He never apologized to me directly, but the conviction was apology enough. I received the final settlement payment and the corrected personnel letter on the same day. I read both documents once, filed them carefully, and then put them away. I didn't frame them or celebrate. They were just pieces of paper that confirmed what I'd always known. The truth matters, and patience pays off. My consulting firm had grown to 4 employees and a waiting list of clients. We specialized in clean processes, transparent vendor management, and ethical business practices. The work was challenging and rewarding, and I woke up every morning excited to solve new problems. On my office desk, in the corner where the morning sun hit it just right, I kept a single memento from my old life. The key card I'd refused to surrender that day in the glass conference room. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be erased. I wasn't the woman Matthew had slapped anymore. I was the woman who had stood up, documented everything, and built something better from the ashes of his cruelty. The key card caught the light as I prepared to lock up my office for the evening. Unlike my old job, I didn't have a badge that someone could demand or revoke. I had a key that belonged to me, to a business I'd built with my own hands and my own reputation. My phone buzzed with an email from a new client, a Fortune 500 company that wanted to overhaul their entire procurement system. The contract would be my largest yet, big enough to hire more staff and move to a bigger office. I smiled as I read their requirements. They wanted someone with proven experience in fraud detection and a track record of ethical business practices. Matthew's assault had accidentally created the perfect credentials for my new career. The irony wasn't lost on me. His attempt to silence me had given me a voice. His effort to destroy my career had built me a better one. His violence had taught me the value of patience, documentation, and strategic thinking. I turned off the lights and locked the door with my own key. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients, and new opportunities to prove that boring, methodical work could change everything. Matthew Vale had taught me that power isn't about who can hit the hardest or shout the loudest. Real power belongs to the person who keeps their receipts, follows the rules, and never stops building something better. I walked into the evening air, finally free.